The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the tin roof of the Craven County Sheriff's office with a rhythm that felt like accusation, like the sky itself was demanding answers. Detective Sarah Brennan stood at the window of the conference room, watching water pool in the parking lot, reflecting the red and blue lights of patrol cars that never seemed to rest anymore. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she kept holding the mug anyway, her knuckles white around the ceramic. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Behind her, the room hummed with controlled chaos. Evidence boxes lined the walls, stacked 3 high, each one labeled with a date that made her chest tighten. October 2001. 23 years. Nearly a quarter century since Amelia Taylor walked out of the Riverside Diner on a Tuesday night and never came home. Sarah. The voice belonged to Deputy Marshal Kevin Torres, who'd driven up from Raleigh that morning with a file so thick it required both hands to carry. "You need to see this." She turned from the window, and the look on his face told her everything. This wasn't another dead end. This wasn't another promising lead that would dissolve like morning fog. This was real. The photograph he placed on the conference table showed a woman in her mid-40s, smiling at a church picnic. Blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, laugh lines around her eyes, holding a paper plate of potato salad. She looked like someone's favorite aunt. She looked like she'd never hurt anyone in her life. "Janet Holloway," Torres said quietly. "Dental records match. DNA confirms. The remains we found in the Neuse River last month. They're hers." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Janet Holloway had disappeared 6 months after Amelia Taylor. Different circumstances, different part of town, but the same questions. The same grief-stricken families. The same community that had learned to lock their doors at night and teach their daughters to walk in pairs. "There's more." Torres pulled out another file, and Sarah saw his hand shake slightly. "We ran the evidence through the new database, cross-referenced with the Taylor case. Sarah, we got a match." The name on the document made the room tilt. Marcus Chen, age 47, resident of New Bern, North Carolina. Sarah knew that name. Everyone in Craven County knew that name. Marcus Chen owned the community center on Broad Street. He coached Little League. He organized the annual Christmas toy drive. He'd served on the city council for 12 years. When Amelia Taylor disappeared, he'd been one of the first volunteers to join the search parties, spending weekends combing the woods around Croatan National Forest, passing out flyers at every gas station and grocery store within 50 miles. "You're sure?" Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "DNA under Janet Holloway's fingernails. It's a perfect match." Torres met her eyes. "And there's fiber evidence from the Taylor scene, from Amelia's car, that matches carpet samples we took from Chen's 2001 vehicle. The one he sold right after she disappeared." Sarah sat down hard in the nearest chair. She thought of Amelia Taylor's mother, Eleanor, who still lived in the same house on Elm Street, who kept Amelia's bedroom exactly as it had been, who answered the phone on the first ring every single time because maybe, just maybe, this would be the call that brought her daughter home. She thought of the vigil Eleanor held every October 17th, the anniversary of Amelia's disappearance. Marcus Chen always attended. He always brought flowers. "When do we move?" Sarah asked. "Now," Torres said. "Teams assembling." "But Sarah, you know what this is going to do to this town." She did. New Bern wasn't a big city. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where your reputation was built over decades, where trust was currency. Marcus Chen had that trust. He'd earned it, cultivated it, lived behind it like a shield. The rain picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere across town, Marcus Chen was probably going about his day, unaware that 23 years of lies were about to come crashing down. Somewhere on Elm Street, Eleanor Taylor was probably sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea from the mug Amelia had given her for Mother's Day 2001, the one that said "World's Best Mom" in purple letters that had started to fade. Sarah grabbed her jacket and her service weapon. "Let's go bring her home." The arrest happened at 6:47 p.m., just as the dinner rush at Marino's Italian restaurant was hitting its peak. Marcus Chen was sitting in a corner booth with his wife, Linda, celebrating their anniversary. 25 years of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah watched through the restaurant window as Torres and 4 other officers moved in. She saw Marcus's face change, confusion first, then alarm, then something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Linda Chen screamed. Other diners pulled out their phones, recording everything. By the time they walked Marcus out in handcuffs, half the town was already watching the footage online. The questions came fast. Why? How? How could we not know? But Sarah was thinking about something else. She was thinking about Amelia Taylor's journal, the one they'd found in her bedroom during the initial investigation. The one where she'd written, just 2 weeks before she disappeared, "I think someone's been watching me. I don't know why I feel this way, but I do. Like there are eyes on me even when I'm alone. Em says I'm being paranoid, but I can't shake this feeling. Something's wrong. Something's coming." They'd never figured out who Em was. Amelia had been private about her life, careful with her words. But now Sarah wondered, had she known? Had she sensed something about Marcus Chen, the kind man who volunteered at the soup kitchen, who'd helped her carry groceries to her car once, who always remembered everyone's name? Back at the station, Marcus Chen sat in interview room 2, still wearing the nice shirt he'd put on for his anniversary dinner. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just sat there, staring at his hands, while the recorder ran and Sarah read him his rights. "I want to tell you everything," he said finally. His voice was calm, measured, almost professorial. "I've been waiting for this day for 23 years. Sarah felt her stomach turn. "You've been waiting? Waiting for someone to finally see. Waiting for someone to be smart enough, thorough enough." He looked up, and his eyes were clear, unclouded by tears or regret. "Waiting for someone like you, Detective Brennan. Tell me about Amelia Taylor." Marcus smiled, and it was the same smile Sarah had seen in 100 photographs from community events. Warm, trustworthy, completely empty. "She was perfect," he said. "That was the problem. To understand what Marcus Chen took from the world, you had to understand Amelia Taylor. Not the victim in the case files, not the photograph on the missing person posters, but the woman she'd been before October 17, 2001. Amelia woke every morning at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her alarm. Her body had learned the rhythm of dawn before her mind caught up, a skill she'd developed during her 2 years in the Peace Corps, teaching English in a village outside Accra, Ghana. She'd come back to North Carolina changed, carrying stories she told rarely and memories that lived in the quiet spaces between her words. Her apartment on Queen Street was small but deliberate. Plants lined the windowsills. Snake plants, pothos, a fiddle leaf fig she'd named Bernard who refused to grow despite her constant attention. Books covered every surface. Toni Morrison, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Mary Oliver's poetry collections with pages dog-eared and underlined. On her refrigerator, held by magnets from every state she'd visited, was a list in her own handwriting. Things that matter: 1. Make someone laugh today. 2. Learn something new. 3. Be kind, especially when it's hard. 4. Call mom. She worked at the Craven County Public Library, a job she'd taken temporarily after returning from Africa and then never left. The library director, Patricia Oakes, a woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, had told her during the interview, "We need someone who understands that libraries aren't just about books. They're about people." Amelia understood. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she ran a reading circle for seniors at the Sunset Meadows retirement home. She'd sit in the common room with Mrs. Delacroix, who had Alzheimer's and couldn't remember her own daughter's name but could recite entire passages of Pride and Prejudice. She'd read with Mr. Holbrook, a Korean War veteran who trembled when he held books but steadied when someone read aloud to him. She'd bring cookies, never store-bought, always homemade, and she'd stay an extra hour every time because Mrs. Chen, no relation to Marcus, needed help writing letters to her grandson in the Navy. "You don't have to do this," Patricia would tell her. "It's not in your job description." "I know," Amelia would say, "but it matters." She volunteered at the community center on Wednesday evenings, helping adults study for their GED exams. She tutored in English and math, patient with mistakes, creative with explanations. One of her students, a 38-year-old single mother named Keisha Brooks, had been trying to get her diploma for 6 years. Amelia worked with her every week, and when Keisha finally passed her exam in September 2001, she'd hugged Amelia so tightly they both cried. "I couldn't have done this without you," Keisha had said. "Yes, you could have," Amelia replied. "You just needed someone to believe you would." That was Amelia. She saw potential in people they couldn't see in themselves. But she struggled too. She had days when the world felt too heavy, when she'd come home from the library and lie on her couch staring at the ceiling, tears sliding into her hair. She'd had a relationship end badly the previous spring. A man named David who'd moved to Charlotte for work and asked her to come with him. She'd said no. The library needed her. The reading circle needed her. Her students needed her. "You always put everyone else first," David had said during their last fight. "What about what you need?" She hadn't had an answer for that. Her mother, Eleanor, worried constantly. They had lunch every Sunday at the Riverside Diner, always the same booth by the window, always the same order for Amelia. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, sweet tea with extra lemon. Eleanor would study her daughter's face, searching for signs of stress or sadness or loneliness. "You work too much," Eleanor would say. "I work just enough." Amelia would reply with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Eleanor Taylor had raised Amelia alone after her husband died in a construction accident when Amelia was 7. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep their house, to send Amelia to college, to make sure her daughter had opportunities she'd never had. She taught Amelia to be strong, to be independent, to never need anyone too much. Sometimes Eleanor wondered if she'd taught her daughter too well. "I want you to be happy," Eleanor said one Sunday in early October. "Not just good. Not just helpful. Happy." Amelia reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "I am happy, Mom. I promise." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Amelia existed in that complicated space most people occupy. Mostly content, sometimes lonely, always searching for something she couldn't quite name. She had friends. Her best friend, Jessica Marin, worked as a nurse at Carolina East Medical Center. They'd met in high school, stayed close through college and Amelia's time abroad. Jessica was everything Amelia wasn't: loud, confident, unapologetically ambitious. She'd drag Amelia out dancing, to movies, to the beach on weekends when Amelia tried to hide behind work. "You're 28 years old," Jessica would say. "You're allowed to have fun." "I have fun," Amelia would protest. "Reading to old people is not fun. It's beautiful and wonderful and very you, but it's not fun." They'd laugh and Amelia would go dancing and she'd enjoy herself, and then she'd go home and feel guilty for enjoying herself when there was always more work to be done. More people to help, more ways to be useful. This was Amelia's internal war. The knowledge that she was enough versus the feeling that she could always be more. She kept a journal, black leather with unlined pages. She wrote in it late at night, usually with chamomile tea and the classical music station playing softly. Her entries weren't daily. Sometimes weeks would pass between writings. But when she did write, she was unflinchingly honest. August 12, 2001. "I saw a woman at the library today with 2 small children. They were loud and messy and knocking books off shelves, and she looked so tired, exhausted in a way that goes beyond physical. I helped her find some picture books and she almost cried thanking me. Such a small thing. Why did it feel so big? Why do I feel like I'm collecting these moments, storing them up against something? Against what?" September 23, 2001. David called. Asked if I'd changed my mind. "I haven't. I won't. This is my home. These are my people. But God, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be the kind of person who could just leave, who could choose herself without guilt." October 3, 2001. Something strange happened today. I was leaving the community center after GED class and I felt watched. I know that sounds paranoid. There were plenty of people around, basketball game in the gym, someone's birthday party in the meeting room. but I had this prickling feeling on the back of my neck. When I turned around, I saw him standing by his office door, just looking. He waved. I waved back, but the feeling didn't go away. Marcus Chen. She didn't write his full name. Maybe she didn't want to seem accusatory, even in her private journal. Maybe she didn't trust her own instincts enough to commit them to paper with full certainty. October 10th, 2001. Saw M at the grocery store. He helped me reach something on a high-shelf coffee, I think. He asked about the reading circle, about my students. He always asks the right questions, remembers the details. Why does that feel wrong? Why do I feel guilty for being uncomfortable around someone who's only ever been kind? She told Jessica about the feeling. Trust your gut, Jessica had said immediately. If something feels off, it probably is. But that's not fair, Amelia protested. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's never been anything but nice. Nice isn't the same as safe, Jessica said. And your instincts exist for a reason. But Amelia didn't want to believe in danger. She'd spent her whole life looking for the good in people, refusing to be cynical, choosing hope even when it was harder. She volunteered with Marcus at the community center. She saw him interact with kids, with elderly volunteers, with everyone. He was patient, generous, thoughtful. She told herself she was being paranoid. October 15th, 2001. 2 days until the fall festival. I'm helping with the bake sale. M is organizing the whole thing, of course. He does so much for this community. I should be grateful we have people like him. I am grateful. So why can't I shake this feeling? That was the last entry in her journal before she disappeared. Amelia's daily routine was predictable in the way that made her feel grounded but also vulnerable. She left her apartment at 7:45 a.m. every weekday, walked 3 blocks to the library, unlocked the doors at 8:30 a.m. She took her lunch break at noon, usually eating a sandwich she'd packed the night before while reading in the staff room. She left at 5 p.m., unless it was a volunteer day. On Tuesdays, she went straight to Sunset Meadows. On Wednesdays, the community center. On Thursdays, back to Sunset Meadows. Fridays were for errands, grocery shopping, post office, dry cleaning. Saturdays she reserved for herself. Sometimes hiking in Croatan National Forest, sometimes coffee and a book at the Trent River Coffee Company. Sometimes just cleaning her apartment and calling friends. Sundays were for her mother. This predictability made her feel safe. It also made her easy to watch. Marcus Chen knew her schedule better than she did. He knew she always bought the same coffee, medium roast, no flavors. He knew she parked in the same spot at the community center when she volunteered. He knew she walked home from the library sometimes when the weather was nice, taking the route along the river because she liked watching the water. He'd been watching her for 7 months before he made his move. Started innocently, or at least it looked innocent. A friendly conversation at the community center. A recommendation for a book she might like. An offer to help move boxes at the library when he stopped by to donate some old textbooks. He was careful, patient, strategic. He learned what made her smile. Stories about her students succeeding, updates about the reading circle, anything involving her mother. He learned what made her worried. Budget cuts at the library, students who stopped showing up to GED classes, news stories about violence in other towns. He positioned himself as safe, as trustworthy, as someone who cared about the same things she did. And Amelia, who wanted to believe in people's goodness, who felt guilty for her own suspicions, let herself be convinced. You do so much for others, Marcus told her one Wednesday evening in late September. They were putting away chairs after GED class, and Keisha had just left, still glowing from passing her practice exam. Who takes care of you? I take care of myself, Amelia said lightly. But everyone needs support, Marcus pressed. Everyone needs someone who sees them. I have people, Amelia said, feeling defensive without knowing why. My mom, Jessica, Patricia at the library. Of course, Marcus said, backing off immediately. I just mean, you're special, Amelia. You make this community better. I hope you know that. She'd thanked him and gone home, and that night she'd written the journal entry about feeling watched. Her instincts were screaming. But she'd been taught to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to not make accusations without proof. So she ignored the screaming. The last day anyone saw Amelia Taylor alive was October 17, 2001. She'd worked her regular shift at the library. Patricia remembered her shelving books in the biography section, humming something under her breath. A patron remembered her helping find resources about local history for a school project. At 5:03 p.m., she'd clocked out. At 5:15 p.m., she'd stopped at the Riverside Diner to pick up dinner to go. Tomato soup and a grilled cheese, her comfort meal. The waitress, young and new, didn't remember anything unusual about the transaction. At 5:47 p.m., Amelia's neighbor, Mr. Phillips, saw her car pull into her apartment complex parking lot. He was watering his plants on his balcony. He waved. She waved back. At 6:30 p.m., Eleanor called Amelia's landline. No answer. She left a message. "Hey honey, just checking in. Call me when you can. Love you." At 8:15 p.m., Jessica called. No answer. At 9 p.m., Eleanor called again. Still no answer. At 10:30 p.m., Eleanor called Jessica. "Have you heard from Amelia?" "Not since yesterday," Jessica said. "Why?" "She's not answering her phone." "That's not like her." They both knew Amelia always answered or called back within an hour. Always. At 11 p.m., Eleanor drove to Amelia's apartment. The lights were off. Her car was in the parking lot. Eleanor knocked. No answer. She used her emergency key. Amelia had given it to her just in case, and let herself in. The apartment was empty. Amelia's purse was on the counter. Her keys were hanging on the hook by the door. The takeout bag from the Riverside Diner sat unopened on the kitchen table, the food long cold. Her journal was on the coffee table, open to the October 15th entry. Eleanor called the police at 11:27 p.m. By midnight, officers were canvassing the neighborhood. By morning, search parties were forming. By the afternoon, Marcus Chen was at the community center organizing volunteers, printing flyers, setting up a tip line. "We'll find her," he told Eleanor, taking her hands in his face the picture of concerned compassion. "I promise you we'll bring Amelia home." Eleanor believed him. Everyone believed him. That was his greatest weapon, believability. The first 48 hours after Amelia disappeared felt like drowning in slow motion. Eleanor Taylor didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's face, heard her daughter's voice, felt the weight of all the things she should have said but hadn't. The police treated it seriously from the start. A young woman responsible, no history of running away, car and purse left behind. Detective Raymond Hughes, who'd been with the Craven County Sheriff's Office for 19 years, took the lead. He was methodical, thorough, and kind in that gruff way career cops sometimes develop as armor against heartbreak. "We're going to find her, Mrs. Taylor," he told Eleanor in her living room, surrounded by photos of Amelia at every age. "But I need you to tell me everything." So Eleanor did. She told him about David, the ex-boyfriend in Charlotte, about Amelia's volunteering, her friends, her routines, about the call every Sunday, the lunch every week, about how Amelia had seemed distracted lately, maybe a little worried, but nothing alarming. Nothing that suggested she was in danger. "Did she mention anyone making her uncomfortable?" Hughes asked. Eleanor thought hard. "No. But Amelia, she wouldn't want to worry me. She might not have said even if someone did." That was the truth that haunted Eleanor. Her daughter's kindness, her constant consideration for others, might have made her hide her own fear. Jessica gave them more. She told them about Amelia's feeling of being watched, about the journal entries, vague as they were, about M at the community center. Marcus Chen. Hughes had looked surprised. "The councilman?" "Amelia never said it was anything definite," Jessica said quickly. "Just a feeling." They interviewed Marcus on day 3. He came to the station voluntarily, bringing coffee for the detectives, apologizing for not being more helpful. "Amelia was wonderful," he said, his voice heavy with concern. She volunteered every Wednesday, always on time, always prepared. The students loved her. Did you notice anything unusual about her behavior recently? Hughes asked. Marcus thought, then shook his head. She seemed a little tired, maybe, but she worked so hard. She gave so much of herself. His eyes welled up. God, I hope she's okay. They asked about his whereabouts on October 17th. He'd been at the community center until 6 p.m., then went home to his wife. Linda Chen confirmed it. They'd had dinner together, watched TV, gone to bed around 10:30 p.m. Normal evening. Nothing suspicious. They had no reason to doubt him. They searched Croatan National Forest with dogs and volunteers. They dragged parts of the Trent River. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, every person who'd seen Amelia in the weeks before she vanished. They put her face on the news, in newspapers, on flyers that covered every telephone pole in 3 counties. Tips came in by the hundreds. Someone saw her at a gas station in Wilmington. Someone else spotted her in Virginia. A psychic called claiming Amelia was being held in an abandoned warehouse. None of it led anywhere. David, the ex-boyfriend, drove up from Charlotte and submitted to questioning voluntarily. He had alibis, records, proof he was nowhere near New Bern. He sat in Eleanor's living room and cried. I loved her, he said. I still love her. I should have stayed. I should have been here. But he wasn't, and that wasn't helpful, and after 2 days he went back to Charlotte carrying guilt he'd never fully put down. Weeks became months. The searches continued but grew smaller. The tips slowed to a trickle. The media moved on to other stories. Life went on because it had to, even though Eleanor's didn't. She kept Amelia's apartment exactly as it was for 6 months, paying the rent, visiting twice a week to water the plants and dust the surfaces. Bernard the fiddle leaf fig died anyway. She couldn't save it. She went back to work. She was a secretary at an insurance office because she needed something to do with her hands, needed structure to keep from falling apart completely. Her co-workers were kind but careful, speaking to her in soft voices, avoiding mentions of their own daughters. Jessica visited every week, bringing groceries, cleaning Eleanor's house, forcing her to eat. You have to take care of yourself, Jessica said. Amelia would want that. Amelia would want me to find her, Eleanor replied. The community rallied in the way small towns do. They organized fundraisers for the reward fund. They held vigils. Patricia at the library set up a memorial scholarship in Amelia's name for volunteers. The students from the GED program dedicated their next graduation ceremony to her. And Marcus Chen was there for all of it. He was the first to volunteer for search parties. He donated generously to the reward fund. He organized a 5K run to raise awareness. He spoke at vigils, his voice cracking with emotion, calling Amelia the heart of this community. People said things like, "At least there are still good people like Marcus in the world." Eleanor hugged him at the 6-month vigil. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not forgetting her." "I could never forget Amelia," he said, and meant it. But the case wasn't just about Amelia. 6 months after she disappeared, Janet Holloway vanished from a shopping center parking lot in broad daylight. She was 42, married, mother of 2 teenage boys. She'd gone to Target to buy groceries and never came home. Her car was found 3 days later, abandoned in a park 20 miles away. Her purse was inside, wallet intact, no signs of struggle. It was like she'd simply evaporated. Detective Hughes saw the similarities immediately. 2 women responsible, no reason to run. Both vanished without warning, leaving their lives behind untouched. Both from Craven County. "We might have a predator," he told his captain. They formed a task force. They compared evidence, looked for connections. Amelia and Janet didn't know each other. They moved in different circles, lived in different parts of town. But they were both women alone at vulnerable moments. They were both taken cleanly, efficiently, leaving almost no trace. The town that had been worried became frightened. Parents kept their daughters close. Women stopped going places alone. Gun sales went up. The community that had once felt safe, that had left doors unlocked and keys in ignitions, learned to be afraid. And still, no one suspected Marcus Chen. Why would they? He increased security at the community center. He started a neighborhood watch program. He gave interviews to the local paper about safety and vigilance. He was the voice of reason, the steady presence in the chaos. He was interviewed again about Janet Holloway. No, he didn't know her well. Yes, he'd seen her at community events a few times. Yes, it was terrible, frightening. Yes, he'd help however he could. His alibi for the day Janet disappeared was airtight. He'd been at a city council meeting, surrounded by witnesses, from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Janet had been seen at Target at 3:30 p.m. Timeline didn't work. Except it did. Because Marcus had left the council meeting for 20 minutes. Bathroom break, he'd said. Maybe grabbed a coffee. No one tracked him. No one thought to. 20 minutes was enough. Detective Hughes worked the case obsessively. He took the files home, studied them at his kitchen table until 2 a.m., drove his wife crazy with his distraction. He knew he was missing something. He felt it the way you feel weather changing, a pressure in the air that means storms coming. But he couldn't find it. The task force brought in the FBI. Special Agent Karen Williams, mid-40s, 2 decades of experience with violent crimes, came down from Quantico with a team and a profile. You're looking for someone organized, she told them. Someone patient. This isn't impulsive, this is planned, methodical. Your unsub likely presents as normal, even charismatic. He's probably integrated into the community, possibly in a position of trust or authority. How do we find him? Hughes asked. Keep looking at the evidence. Keep interviewing. Someone knows something, even if they don't realize it. She paused. And be prepared, there may be more victims. Men like this don't usually stop at 2. Eleanor Taylor attended every press conference, stood at every vigil, gave every interview requested. Her hair went gray in the span of a year. She lost 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Friends worried she was fading, disappearing in slow motion the way her daughter had vanished in an instant. But she refused to give up. She kept boxes of flyers in her car trunk, replacing the ones that got weathered or torn down. She updated the missing person poster with age progression photos the FBI created, showing what Amelia might look like at 30, at 35. She called Detective Hughes every week. Anything new? Usually the answer was no. Jessica balanced her nursing shifts with checking on Eleanor, organizing volunteer efforts, keeping Amelia's memory alive on early social media platforms, MySpace pages and email chains and physical bulletin boards in coffee shops and grocery stores. We can't let people forget, Jessica said to anyone who'd listen. The moment we forget is the moment we lose her forever. But people did forget. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but in the way that tragedy becomes background noise when it's not resolved quickly. Amelia's missing person poster got buried under lost pet flyers and yard sale announcements. Janet Holloway's face joined hers, and then the space on community boards filled with other news, other concerns. Life relentlessly continued. Years passed. 3, 5, 10. Detective Hughes retired in 2009. He gave his case files to Detective Sarah Brennan, who'd joined the force in 2004, who'd grown up hearing about Amelia Taylor and Janet Holloway like ghost stories. Be careful. Don't go out alone. Remember what happened. Don't let this go cold. Hughes told her on his last day. Someone out there knows something. Sarah promised. She kept the files in her office, revisited them quarterly, ran new searches when technology advanced. DNA databases expanded. Forensic techniques improved. She submitted evidence for retesting, hoping for miracles. In 2015, she got one. A database match pinged, not for Amelia or Janet, but for another case entirely. A sexual assault in Tennessee, 1999. The DNA had been in the system for years, unmatched, until new cross-referencing software made unexpected connections. The DNA belonged to Marcus Chen. The assault victim had never gotten justice. The case had gone cold. But now there was a name, and Sarah started pulling threads. She found inconsistencies in Marcus's alibis that no one had noticed before. She found gaps in his whereabouts that matched other unsolved disappearances in neighboring counties. a woman in 1997, another in 2003. All of them volunteers, all of them kind women who trusted easily. She found a pattern. But she needed proof. She needed evidence that would stand up in court, that would survive scrutiny, that would bring Eleanor Taylor the answers she'd been waiting for. So Sarah became obsessed the way Hughes had been. She worked nights and weekends. She drove to Tennessee to interview the assault victim, now living under a different name, still traumatized. She traced Marcus's vehicle history, his property records, his financial transactions. She found a storage unit he'd rented in 2001 and closed in 2002. She got a warrant, opened it. It was empty now, scrubbed clean. But luminol revealed blood traces that had seeped into concrete. She found the company that had towed his 2001 vehicle after he sold it. The car had been resold twice, eventually ended up in a junkyard. She got a warrant for the wreckage. Crime scene techs spent 3 days going through it with tweezers and microscopes. They found carpet fibers in the trunk that matched fibers found on Amelia Taylor's jacket, the one she'd been wearing the day she disappeared, found discarded on a forest road 3 months later. They found a single hair, preserved in a crack in the frame, that DNA confirmed was Janet Holloway's. Sarah's hands shook when she saw the results. 23 years. 2 decades of a predator hiding in plain sight, protected by his reputation, by people's inability to believe that someone so kind could do something so evil. She called Torres at the Marshal Service. "I've got him." They'd moved carefully. No leaks, no warnings. They'd waited until they had everything: DNA, fibers, financial records, witness statements, expert testimony. They'd built a case that was airtight, unshakable. And then they'd watched Marcus Chen for 3 weeks, documenting his movements, his routines. He still coached Little League. He still organized toy drives. He still attended city council meetings and volunteered at the food bank. He still visited Eleanor Taylor twice a year, bringing flowers on Amelia's birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. "I think about her every day," he told Eleanor in April 2024, sitting in her living room, holding her hand. "I'll never stop hoping we find answers." Eleanor had cried and thanked him for his faithfulness. Sarah had watched the surveillance footage of that visit and felt physically sick. The arrest at Marino's Italian restaurant made national news within hours. Not just local stations, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. The story had everything. A decades-old cold case. A pillar of the community revealed as a predator. Small-town secrets exposed. Marcus Chen's face was everywhere. Not the mugshot that came later, but photos from community events. Marcus with Little League teams. Marcus at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Marcus receiving awards for public service. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Linda Chen, his wife of 25 years, collapsed when they arrested him. She was taken to Carolina East Medical Center, the same hospital where Jessica worked. Jessica saw her in the ER, recognized her, and had to leave the room before she said something she'd regret. How could Linda not have known? That was the question everyone asked. How could you live with someone for decades and not see what they were? But Sarah knew the answer. Predators are experts at compartmentalization. They create separate lives, separate identities. They show each person exactly what that person needs to see. Marcus had been a loving husband to Linda, a dedicated community servant to New Bern, and a monster in the spaces no one watched. The city council held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Marcus from his position. The community center took down his photo from the wall of volunteers. The Little League renamed the field that had been dedicated to him. People who'd known him for years gave interviews saying they'd always felt something was off. Sarah knew that was hindsight bias, the human need to retroactively make sense of senselessness. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. No one had suspected because Marcus had been perfect at being unsuspicious. Eleanor Taylor got the call from Sarah at 7:15 p.m. while watching the news footage of the arrest. She'd already seen his face on TV, already felt the world tilt sideways. "Mrs. Taylor, this is Detective Brennan. I need you to sit down." "I'm sitting," Eleanor said, though she wasn't. She was standing in her kitchen, one hand on the counter to keep from falling. "We've arrested Marcus Chen for Amelia's murder." And for Janet Holloway's murder, we have DNA evidence, fiber evidence, and a confession. The phone slipped from Eleanor's hand. Jessica, who'd rushed over as soon as the news broke, caught her as her legs gave out. Is she? Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence. After 23 years of hope and denial and desperate prayer, she couldn't say the word. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and her voice cracked. Amelia didn't survive. Marcus has told us where to find her remains. The sound Eleanor made wasn't quite human. It was the sound of a heart breaking, a sound Jessica had heard in hospital rooms when families got the worst news, but never from someone she loved. I'm so sorry, Sarah kept saying. I'm so sorry. But sorry didn't bring Amelia back. Sorry didn't give Eleanor the last 23 years. Sorry didn't undo the fact that she'd hugged her daughter's killer, thanked him, trusted him. The confession came in pieces over 3 days of interviews. Marcus didn't ask for a lawyer immediately. He seemed almost relieved to finally talk, to finally be seen for what he was. I knew it was only a matter of time, he told Sarah in interview room 2, his voice calm and measured. Technology keeps advancing. You can't stay hidden forever. Why Amelia? Sarah asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. She was perfect, he finally said. Not perfect like flawless. Perfect like complete. She knew who she was. She was genuinely good, not performatively good. I've spent my whole life performing goodness, and she just was. So you killed her for being authentic? I killed her because I wanted to possess that authenticity. I wanted to own it, control it, keep it. He looked at Sarah with those clear, empty eyes. But you can't possess goodness by destroying it. I learned that too late. Where is she? He told them. A location in Croatan National Forest, off a maintenance road that rarely saw traffic, buried beneath transplanted vegetation that had grown thick over 2 decades. A place he'd prepared months in advance, waiting for the right opportunity. And Janet Holloway? Neuse River weighted down. I thought the water would destroy the evidence. He smiled slightly. I was wrong. Sarah wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream. Instead, she kept her voice level and professional. How many others? Others? Marcus raised his eyebrows. Don't play games. We know about Tennessee. We're looking into cases in 4 other counties. How many women did you hurt? He leaned back in his chair, considering. If I tell you, do I get something in return? You get the knowledge that their families might finally have closure. That's what you get. Marcus laughed, a sound without humor. Closure. Such a pretty word for such an impossible thing. But eventually he talked. Not out of remorse. Sarah saw no evidence of genuine remorse, but out of ego. He wanted credit for his intelligence, his planning, his decades of successfully hiding. He wanted recognition for the effort it had taken to be Marcus Chen, upstanding citizen, while simultaneously being someone else entirely. He told them about 6 other women across 3 states, spanning 1997 to 2003. All of them volunteers, all of them kind, all of them carefully selected and meticulously eliminated. After 2003, I stopped, he said. I had Linda, the community position, too much to risk. And honestly, I didn't need it anymore. The urge faded. I'd proven what I wanted to prove. Which was that I could be anyone, that I could wear goodness like a costume and no one would see beneath it. He tilted his head. And I was right. For 23 years, I was right. The recovery of Amelia's remains took 3 days. Forensic anthropologists, crime scene investigators, and cadaver dogs descended on the forest location Marcus described. The media camped outside the police perimeter, broadcasting live updates. Eleanor insisted on being there. Sarah tried to dissuade her. It's not something you want to see, Mrs. Taylor. But Eleanor was immovable. I've waited 23 years, she said. I'm not waiting anymore. So Sarah brought her to the edge of the perimeter, far enough that she couldn't see the excavation but close enough that she'd know the moment they found something. They found her on day 2 in the afternoon, when the light was starting to go golden through the trees. Sarah heard it on the radio first. We've got remains. Multiple bones, clothing fragments, personal effects. She looked at Eleanor, whose face had gone completely white. Is it her? They'll need to confirm with dental records and DNA, but… Yes, I believe it's her. Eleanor closed her eyes. Tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. After a moment, she opened her eyes and looked at Sarah. Can I see where she was? Mrs. Taylor, please, I need to see. So Sarah walked her up the maintenance road, past the crime scene tape, to the edge of the excavation site. The forensic team had worked carefully, treating Amelia's remains with reverence. They'd uncovered her slowly, documenting everything, preserving evidence while also preserving dignity. Eleanor stood at the edge of the site and looked down at the bones of her daughter. 23 years in the ground, reduced to skeleton and scraps of clothing. The earth had taken her, transformed her, made her part of the forest. Hi, baby, Eleanor whispered. I'm here. Mama's here. Jessica stood beside her, holding her up, crying silently. They found Amelia's necklace among the remains. A simple silver chain with a small cross that Eleanor had given her for her confirmation. They found buttons from her cardigan. They found one shoe, the leather rotted but still recognizable. They found enough to confirm what everyone already knew. Amelia Taylor had been murdered and buried here, hidden and forgotten by everyone except the man who put her in the ground and the mother who never stopped looking. Janet Holloway's remains came out of the Neuse River 2 weeks later, during a systematic search of the area Marcus described. She'd been weighted down with cinder blocks and chain, but over time the chain had rusted and broken, allowing her to shift with currents. A fisherman had actually found her initially, a month before Marcus's arrest, calling in what he thought was debris. It hadn't been debris. Janet's husband, Robert, had remarried 5 years after she disappeared. He'd moved on because he had to, because their boys needed stability, because life demanded it. But when they confirmed the remains were Janet's, he came to the sheriff's office and cried like a man who'd been holding his breath for 23 years. I thought maybe she'd left us, he said to Sarah. I know that's terrible, but I thought maybe she'd been unhappy and just run away. I thought maybe somewhere she was alive and okay, even if she didn't want to be with us anymore. That seemed better than this. There's no good way for this to end, Sarah said gently. But at least now you know. At least now you can lay her to rest properly. The community held a joint memorial service for Amelia and Janet at the First Baptist Church. Over 1,000 people attended. The church couldn't hold them all. People stood in the parking lot, listening to speakers piped through outdoor speakers. Patricia from the library spoke about Amelia's dedication. Keisha, the GED student, spoke about how Amelia had changed her life. Jessica spoke, though she had to stop several times to collect herself. Amelia believed in people, Jessica said. She believed in goodness. And the fact that someone took advantage of that someone weaponized her kindness against her, doesn't diminish who she was. If anything, it makes her light shine brighter. Because she chose to be good even when the world gave her reasons not to be. Eleanor couldn't speak. She sat in the front row, surrounded by photos of Amelia at every age, and let others tell her daughter's story. Marcus Chen's name was never mentioned during the service. He'd taken enough. He wouldn't take this too. The trial began 14 months after Marcus Chen's arrest. In January 2026, the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Harrison, had spent over a year building an overwhelming case. They had DNA evidence, fiber analysis, Marcus's confession, testimony from the Tennessee victim, financial records showing his storage unit rental, cell tower data placing him near abduction sites, and expert witness after expert witness. The defense, led by a Raleigh attorney named Richard Paulson who'd made his career defending the indefensible, had only one strategy. Claim the confession was coerced, cast doubt on the evidence processing, and hope for reasonable doubt. It wouldn't work, but they had to try. The courtroom was packed every single day. Eleanor sat in the front row, directly in Marcus's line of sight. She wanted him to see her. She wanted him to have to look at what he'd done. Marcus wore suits every day, neat and pressed. He kept his expression neutral, occasionally taking notes, whispering to his attorney. He looked like what he'd always been. A respectable man, someone you'd trust with your children, someone you'd elect to office. That was the horror of it. The prosecution called witness after witness. Sarah Brennan testified about the investigation, the evidence, the painstaking work of connecting decades-old clues. The forensic anthropologist who'd recovered Amelia's remains testified about findings consistent with homicide. Hyoid bone damage indicating strangulation. She fought, the anthropologist said. The position of her remains and fracture patterns suggest she struggled. Eleanor closed her eyes and gripped Jessica's hand until both their fingers went white. The DNA expert explained the matches. Marcus's DNA under Janet Holloway's fingernails, consistent with defensive wounds. The hair found in his vehicle trunk. The blood traces in his former storage unit that matched Amelia's type. DNA testing confirmed with samples from Eleanor. The probability that these samples came from anyone other than the victims is less than 1 in 50 trillion. The expert testified. Patricia from the library testified about Amelia's character, her work, her dedication. She was the best person I've ever known, Patricia said, looking directly at Marcus. And you took her from us. The Tennessee victim testified behind a screen, voice disguised to protect her identity. She described the attack in 1999, the man who'd seemed so helpful, so trustworthy, right up until he wasn't. She'd survived by fighting hard enough that he'd fled, leaving behind DNA evidence that had languished in an evidence locker for 16 years before finally being matched. I've lived with this for 27 years, she said. I've had nightmares, panic attacks, therapy. I blamed myself, but it wasn't my fault. It was his, and I want everyone to know what he is. Linda Chun testified for the prosecution. The defense had hoped she'd support her husband, but she didn't. She'd filed for divorce within a week of his arrest, moved out of their house, changed her last name back to her maiden name. I didn't know, she said on the stand, her voice shaking. I swear to God, I didn't know. He was kind to me, attentive, present. We had a good marriage, or I thought we did. I never saw anything that made me suspicious. Did he ever display violence toward you? Harrison asked. Never. Not once. He was gentle, patient. He remembered anniversaries, brought me flowers. He was... She choked on the word. He was perfect. What do you want to say to the victims' families? Linda looked at Eleanor, then at Robert Holloway, who sat a few rows back. I am so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know my ignorance doesn't absolve me of being married to him, of benefiting from the life he built on your daughter's graves. I'm sorry. I'll be sorry for the rest of my life. The defense tried to suggest Linda must have known, must have been complicit. She fell apart on the stand, sobbing so hard the judge called a recess. Eleanor found her in the bathroom afterward, sitting on the floor, makeup ruined. Mrs. Chun, Eleanor said quietly. Linda looked up, stricken. I'm so sorry. I don't blame you, Eleanor said. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement. He fooled all of us. The defense's case was weak because there was no real defense. They called character witnesses who testified that Marcus had been kind, generous, involved. They tried to paint him as a pillar of the community, someone who couldn't possibly have done these things. But then the prosecution would remind the jury. Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbors thought he was quiet and polite. Ted Bundy worked at a suicide hotline. Dennis Rader was a Boy Scout leader and church president. Monsters don't look like monsters. That's how they survive. The defense tried to attack the confession. Detective Brennan kept my client in interrogation for hours. He was exhausted, stressed, not in his right mind. But the recordings showed otherwise. Marcus had been calm, clear, specific. He'd waived his rights knowingly. He'd volunteered information no one had asked for. He'd led them to burial sites. The defense had nothing, and everyone knew it. Marcus took the stand in his own defense, against his attorney's advice. Paulson had begged him not to, but Marcus insisted. I want people to understand, he said. What followed was 3 hours of the most chilling testimony Sarah had ever witnessed. Marcus didn't deny the crimes. He couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Instead, he tried to explain himself. "I've spent my entire life feeling disconnected from other people," he said, his voice professorial, like he was teaching a class. "I watch people experience emotions and I mimic them. I learn what response is appropriate and I produce it. But I don't feel it. Not really." "So you're claiming you're a psychopath?" Harrison asked on cross-examination. "I'm claiming I see the world differently than you do. To me, people are puzzles. Interesting puzzles, complex puzzles, but still puzzles. And I wanted to understand them. I wanted to know what it felt like to have that much power over someone, to literally hold life and death in my hands." "So you killed Amelia Taylor to satisfy your curiosity?" "I killed Amelia Taylor because she represented something I couldn't understand, genuine goodness, and I wanted to see if I could extinguish it. If I could take something pure and destroy it completely." The courtroom was silent. Several jurors looked physically ill. "And did you? Did you extinguish her goodness?" Harrison pressed. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "She's more present now than she ever was alive. Everyone remembers her kindness, her light. I took her life, but I couldn't take her impact. So in that sense, I failed." "You failed?" Harrison repeated, his voice hard. "You brutally murdered an innocent woman who trusted you, and you consider that a failure of your experiment?" "I consider it a failure of my hypothesis, yes." Harrison turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant has just confirmed what we've known all along. He is a remorseless predator who views human beings as objects for his entertainment. He doesn't deserve your mercy because he has never shown any himself." Marcus's testimony sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, multiple counts of assault, evidence tampering, and half a dozen other charges. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later. North Carolina had reinstated the death penalty in specific circumstances, and the prosecution was pushing for it. Eleanor was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium, smaller than she'd been before all this started, grayer, more fragile. But her voice was steady. "Marcus Chen," she said, looking directly at him. "You took my daughter. You took my best friend, my reason for getting up in the morning, my entire future. You took 23 years of my life that I spent hoping, praying, searching. You took my peace, my security, my faith in humanity. But here's what you didn't take. You didn't take Amelia's impact. You didn't take the lives she changed, the people she helped, the love she spread. You didn't take my memories of her. You didn't take the fact that she was good and kind and real, while you are empty and cruel and fake. You said she was perfect. You were right. She was perfect and you are nothing. You are less than nothing. You are a void that pretended to be human, and now everyone sees you for what you really are." "I don't want you to die," Eleanor said, and the courtroom murmured. "I want you to live a very long life in a very small cell, thinking every single day about how you failed. How you took everything from us but we still won. Because we loved Amelia and she loved us. And that's something you'll never understand. You'll never have that. You'll die alone, forgotten, and unloved, while Amelia will be remembered forever. That's my justice." Janet Holloway's son, now 32 years old, gave a statement next. "You took our mother. You took our childhood. You took our father's happiness for years. But we survived. We built lives. We found joy despite you. And that's our revenge. We're happy, and you never will be." The judge, a severe woman named Patricia Vance who'd been on the bench for 23 years, sentenced Marcus to life without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively for both murders, plus additional time for all other charges. "Mr. Chen," she said, "you will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will never again walk free. You will never again hurt anyone. And when you die, you will be buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten, while your victims are remembered and mourned. That is the court's judgment." Marcus showed no reaction. He simply nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already known. The revelations continued even after the trial. The FBI, now deeply involved, uncovered more victims. Women whose disappearances had been classified as runaways or accidents. Women whose families had never gotten answers. In total, they confirmed 12 victims across 4 states, spanning 1995 to 2003. 12 women, all volunteers, all kind, all targeted specifically for those qualities. Each family got a call. Each family got closure, or the closest thing to closure that exists when your loved one has been murdered by a monster who wore a smile. Sarah coordinated with agencies across state lines. She traveled to deliver notifications personally when she could, sitting in living rooms and looking at photos of women who'd been gone for decades. Women who'd been mourned and missed and never forgotten. "We finally know," she'd tell the families. "I'm so sorry it took this long, but we finally know." Some families were angry. Some were grateful. Most were both. The emotions of delayed grief are complicated. Relief that the not knowing is over. Rage that it took so long. Sorrow reopened fresh despite years of scabbing over. Community members who'd known Marcus struggled with their own guilt and confusion. People who'd worked alongside him, who'd considered him a friend, who'd trusted him with their children. The little league coach who'd co-coached with Marcus for 8 years broke down during a news interview. "I let him around my kids. I had barbecues with him. I thought he was one of the good guys. How did I not see it?" But Sarah knew the answer. You can't see what someone is determined to hide, especially when they're skilled at hiding it. Marcus had spent decades perfecting his mask, studying human behavior, learning to mimic connection and care. He'd been a method actor playing the role of good man, and he'd been so good at it that he'd won awards, literally community service awards, Volunteer of the Year, Keys to the City. The community center struggled with what to do about the programs he'd built. Some people wanted everything erased, every trace of him removed. Others argued that the programs helped people, that destroying them would give him more power. Eventually, they compromised. They kept the programs but renamed them. The GED program became the Amelia Taylor Educational Center. The Youth Basketball League became the Janet Holloway Memorial League. They took what Marcus had built using stolen goodness and reclaimed it, renamed it, repurposed it for the women he'd destroyed. Eleanor worked with Jessica and Patricia to establish the Amelia Taylor Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting volunteers and nonprofit workers. They raised money through donations and fundraisers, providing grants to organizations doing community work, scholarships for students pursuing careers in social services. Amelia gave her life to helping others, Eleanor said at the foundation's launch. "We're going to make sure that work continues, that her light keeps shining, that she keeps making the world better even though she's not here to do it herself." The foundation became Eleanor's purpose, her reason to keep going. She channeled her grief into action, her rage into productivity. She couldn't bring Amelia back, but she could honor her memory. She could make sure Amelia's death meant something beyond tragedy. 2 years after the trial, the community had found a rhythm. Not healing exactly, some wounds don't heal, but a way of living with the scar tissue. The Amelia Taylor Foundation had awarded 53 grants and 12 scholarships. They'd partnered with libraries across the state to create reading programs modeled after the one Amelia ran at Sunset Meadows. They'd funded GED prep courses, volunteer training programs, and community safety initiatives. Eleanor worked at the foundation office 3 days a week. She'd quit her job at the insurance company, using money from Amelia's life insurance policy. A policy Eleanor had taken out when Amelia turned 18, just in case, to fund her transition. She was 73 years old now, her hair completely white, her face lined with years of grief, but she smiled more than she had in decades. "I feel close to her when I'm doing this work," Eleanor told Jessica over lunch one afternoon. They still met every Sunday, now at a different diner. Neither of them could stomach going back to the riverside. "Like she's working through me." Jessica, who'd been promoted to head nurse in the ICU, squeezed her hand. "She is. You're keeping her alive in all the ways that matter." The library had dedicated their reading room to Amelia. A bronze plaque on the door read, "The Amelia Taylor Reading Room, where kindness lives forever." Inside, Patricia had created a memorial wall with photos of Amelia at work, testimonials from people she'd helped, and copies of her favorite books available for anyone to borrow. Children who'd never known Amelia learned her name. They attended programs funded by her foundation. They heard stories about the librarian who'd made reading magical, who'd believed in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. Keisha, the GED student Amelia had tutored, now worked as a teaching assistant at Craven Community College. She taught adult education classes, helping other students the way Amelia had helped her. "I think about her every time I'm in the classroom," Keisha said during an interview for the Foundation newsletter. "I think, what would Amelia do? And then I try to do that. Patience, kindness, belief. That's her legacy, teaching us how to treat each other." The community center had undergone changes too. New leadership, new policies, background check requirements for all volunteers. They'd established a safety committee and a victims support group. They turned Marcus's former office into a resource center for crime victims and their families. Sarah continued working cold cases, driven now more than ever to find answers for families waiting in that terrible limbo. She'd closed 4 additional cases in the 2 years since Marcus's trial, bringing remains home, providing closure. She thought of it as honoring Amelia and the other victims, refusing to let anyone else be forgotten. She visited Eleanor quarterly, updating her on new developments, sharing stories about cases she'd solved. They developed an unlikely friendship, bound by their shared experience of seeking truth in darkness. "You gave me my daughter back," Eleanor told her during one visit. "Not the way I wanted, but at least I know. At least she's not lost anymore." Marcus Chen settled into his life sentence at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was kept in protective custody. Prisoners don't look kindly on those who hurt women and children. He spent 23 hours a day in his cell, 1 hour in a private recreation yard, no contact with the general population. He read extensively: philosophy, psychology, neuroscience. He wrote long letters to psychiatrists and researchers, offering himself as a case study. Some responded, curious about the mind of someone so fundamentally different from most humans. He never expressed remorse. In interviews with psychologists, he remained clinical, detached, analytical about his own crimes. He discussed them like they were interesting experiments that hadn't yielded the expected results. "I don't feel what you want me to feel," he told one interviewer. "I understand intellectually that what I did was wrong by society's standards. I understand that it caused pain. But I don't feel guilty about it the way you'd expect. It's not in me to feel that." The interviews were published in academic journals, studied by researchers trying to understand psychopathy, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder. Marcus became a case study, a cautionary tale, a research subject. He hated it, not because he felt shame, but because he'd lost control of his narrative. He was no longer Marcus Chen, respected community leader. He was Subject M, violent offender, textbook psychopath. He'd become ordinary in his monstrosity, just another data point in the study of evil. That was his real punishment: irrelevance. The community learned to trust again, slowly. Parents let their children walk to school. Women jogged alone in the early morning. Doors were left unlocked on warm summer nights. But they'd been changed. They were more careful now, more aware. They paid attention to instincts, to that prickling feeling on the back of the neck that says something's wrong. They taught their children to trust their gut, to understand that being polite isn't worth being unsafe. Amelia's death had taught them that kindness and caution aren't opposites. You can be good and still be vigilant. You can help others while protecting yourself. You can see the best in people while acknowledging that the worst exists. The first generation of Amelia Taylor Foundation scholars graduated college in 2027. 5 students, all pursuing careers in social work, education, or nonprofit management. All of them had written essays about being inspired by Amelia's story, about wanting to carry forward her legacy of service. Eleanor attended all 5 graduation ceremonies. She sat in auditoriums and watched young people walk across stages, collecting degrees earned partly through her daughter's posthumous generosity. She cried at every single one. "Amelia would be so proud," Jessica said, sitting beside her at the last graduation. "She would," Eleanor agreed. "She'd probably cry too. She always cried at graduations." They laughed, and it felt good to laugh about Amelia without it hurting quite so much. New Bern erected a memorial in Union Point Park, overlooking the Neuse River. A simple stone bench with a bronze plaque dedicated to Amelia Taylor and Janet Holloway, and to all victims of violence. Their lights were extinguished, but their legacy endures. May we honor them by choosing kindness, by believing survivors, by protecting the vulnerable. The bench faced east, catching the sunrise. People came to sit there, to think, to remember. Sometimes Eleanor would visit early in the morning, bringing coffee, sitting in silence and watching the sun paint the river gold. She'd talk to Amelia sometimes, out loud, not caring if anyone heard. I planted Bernard's replacement in the front yard. He's doing well. I named him Bernard Jr. She'd smile. I got another one for the library's memorial room. Patricia waters him religiously. I think she's determined not to let another fig die under her watch. She'd talk about the foundation's work, about new scholarships, about students who'd written thank you letters describing how Amelia's legacy had changed their lives. You're still helping people, baby. You're still making the world better. He couldn't take that from you. Sometimes other people would join her, Janet's family, other victims' families, people from the community who wanted to pay respects. The bench became a gathering place, a reminder, a promise to do better. 5 years after the trial, a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Kim approached Eleanor about making a film. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want Amelia reduced to true crime entertainment, another Netflix series for people to binge and forget. But Rachel had a different vision. I don't want to make a documentary about Marcus Chen, Rachel explained during their first meeting. I want to make a documentary about Amelia Taylor, about who she was, what she believed, how she lived. The crime would be part of it, obviously, but the focus would be her life, not her death. Eleanor considered it. Jessica and Patricia attended the meeting to help her decide. What would you call it? Patricia asked. Perfect, Rachel said. That's what Marcus said about her, that she was perfect. I want to reclaim that word, show what he meant versus what she actually was. Not perfect as in flawless, but perfect as in whole, complete, authentically herself. They made the documentary. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2028 and was later picked up by a major streaming service. It featured interviews with Eleanor, Jessica, Patricia, Keisha, her students, library patrons, people from the reading circle at Sunset Meadows. It showed Amelia's journals, her handwriting, her voice preserved in the words she'd written. It used actors to dramatize key moments from her life. Not the murder, which was mentioned but not depicted, but her teaching, her volunteering, her laughter. The documentary ended with footage of the memorial bench, of sunrise over the Neuse River, of the foundation's work continuing. Eleanor's voice played over the images. People ask me how I survived losing Amelia. The truth is, I didn't lose her. She's here in every person who volunteers because of her example, every student who gets a scholarship in her name, every child who learns to read in her memorial room. She's here in the kindness people choose when they could choose cruelty. She's here, and she'll always be here, because love doesn't end just because life does. The documentary reached millions of people. It sparked conversations about volunteer safety, about recognizing predatory behavior, about honoring victims as full human beings rather than tragic statistics. It won awards. Eleanor accepted them on Amelia's behalf, giving speeches about choosing goodness even when evil exists, about building light instead of cursing darkness. Amelia believed in people, Eleanor would say. She believed in second chances and redemption and growth. She saw potential everywhere. And yes, someone took advantage of that. Someone weaponized her kindness. But the answer isn't to stop being kind. The answer is to be kind and careful, to be generous and wise, to trust people while also trusting our instincts. That's what she would want. That's how we honor her. 10 years later, 2034. The Craven County Library hosted its annual Amelia Taylor Memorial Lecture on a crisp October evening. The event had become a tradition, bringing in speakers who embodied the values Amelia lived by: service, education, community building. This year's speaker was Dr. Maya Patel, a psychologist who'd written extensively about recognizing predatory behavior in trusted community figures. Her book, Wolves in Helpers' Clothing, had become required reading for nonprofit organizations and volunteer coordinators nationwide. Eleanor sat in the front row, now 81 years old, her hands folded over her cane. She'd had a hip replacement the previous year and moved a little slower, but her mind was sharp and her voice steady when she introduced the speaker. Amelia would have loved this, Eleanor said to the packed auditorium. She would have taken notes, asked thoughtful questions, and then figured out how to apply what she learned to help more people. That's who she was, always learning, always growing, always looking for ways to make a difference. The audience applauded. Many of them hadn't known Amelia personally. They were too young or new to the area, but they knew her story. She'd become part of New Bern's collective memory, a touchstone, a reminder of both the best and worst of humanity. After the lecture, a young woman approached Eleanor. She was maybe 25, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, earnest eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Taylor? I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Maria Rodriguez. I'm one of your scholarship recipients from 2029. I just graduated with my master's in social work." Eleanor's face lit up. "Maria, yes, I remember your application essay. You wrote about your mother immigrating from El Salvador and working 3 jobs to keep your family fed." Maria looked stunned. "You remember that? That was 5 years ago." "I remember all of you," Eleanor said warmly. "Every single scholar. You're Amelia's legacy." "Of course I remember." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm starting a job next week at a nonprofit that helps refugee families resettle. Everything I'm able to do, I owe to your daughter and to you. I just wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that Amelia is still changing lives." Eleanor hugged her. These moments, these tangible proofs that Amelia's goodness continued rippling outward, these were what kept her going. Later, driving home with Jessica, who'd insisted Eleanor stop driving at night 2 years ago, Eleanor felt content in a way that had once seemed impossible. 63 scholars so far, she said. 63 young people out there doing good work because Amelia inspired them. And hundreds more touched by the Foundation's programs, Jessica added. Thousands, really, if you count all the people they'll help in turn. Exponential goodness, Eleanor murmured. That's what Amelia created. One act of kindness leading to another, spreading out like ripples until you can't even see where it ends. He thought he could extinguish her light, Jessica said. He was wrong. So wrong, Eleanor agreed. 15 years later, 2039. Sarah Brennan retired from the Craven County Sheriff's Office after 35 years of service. Her retirement party was held at the community center, the same building where Marcus Chen had once worked, though almost no one mentioned him anymore. He'd faded into irrelevance, a footnote in a larger story about resilience and justice. Sarah had closed 47 cold cases during her career, 47 families who'd gotten answers, closure, the ability to finally grieve properly. She'd done it for all of them, but especially for Eleanor, for Amelia, for the young woman she'd never met but had fought so hard to bring home. Eleanor attended the retirement party, now 86 and using a wheelchair more often than not. But she was there, presenting Sarah with a plaque from the foundation. The Amelia Taylor Courage Award, Eleanor read aloud, presented to Detective Sarah Brennan, who never stopped searching, never stopped fighting, and never let anyone be forgotten. Thank you for bringing our daughter home. Sarah cried, which surprised her. She thought she was done crying about this case, but apparently grief and gratitude could still ambush you, even after decades. I think about her all the time, Sarah said to Eleanor after the ceremony, sitting together in a quiet corner, about what she might have become if she'd lived. She'd be 51 now. She might have been married, had kids, maybe run the library, maybe done something completely different. We'll never know what she could have been. But we know what she was, Eleanor said firmly. And we know what she still is. An inspiration, a catalyst, a light that kept burning even after it should have gone out. That's more than most people achieve in a full lifetime. Sarah nodded. You're right. You're absolutely right. Of course I am, Eleanor said with a smile. I'm 86. I've earned the right to always be right. They laughed, and it felt good. After all the darkness, all the horror, all the years of searching and grieving, it felt good to laugh. 20 years later, 2044. The Amelia Taylor Foundation celebrated its 20th anniversary with a gala fundraiser that raised over $2 million. The event drew attendees from across the state, former scholars who'd become lawyers, teachers, social workers, doctors, community leaders, politicians, and ordinary citizens who believed in the foundation's mission. Eleanor wasn't there. She'd passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months earlier, at the age of 91. She'd lived long enough to see her daughter's legacy firmly established, long enough to know with certainty that Amelia would never be forgotten. Jessica gave the keynote speech in Eleanor's absence. Eleanor Taylor spent the last 43 years of her life honoring her daughter, Jessica said to the packed ballroom. She took the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful. She didn't let grief destroy her. She let it fuel her. And now, 20 years after starting this foundation, we've awarded over 300 scholarships, funded thousands of programs, touched tens of thousands of lives. That's what love looks like when it refuses to die. That's what Eleanor and Amelia built together. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's early expectations. They'd expanded into 4 states, partnering with organizations across the Southeast. They'd created training programs for volunteer coordinators, safety protocols for nonprofit workers, and educational initiatives about recognizing predatory behavior. They'd taken the lesson of Amelia's death, that monsters can hide behind kindness, that trust must be balanced with wisdom, and turned it into actionable change. Background checks became standard. Safety training became mandatory. Volunteers learned to trust their instincts, to report concerns, to protect each other. The foundation had prevented other tragedies. That was impossible to quantify but true nonetheless. Somewhere, someone had paid attention to a feeling of unease and spoken up. Somewhere, a background check had flagged a potential predator. Somewhere, training had equipped someone to recognize warning signs they might have otherwise dismissed. Amelia was still saving lives. Marcus Chen died in prison in 2043, at the age of 66. A heart attack, sudden and anticlimactic. There was no funeral, no memorial. His body was cremated and his ashes disposed of according to state procedures for unclaimed remains. A few academic journals noted his death with brief obituaries focused on his criminal history and the research his case had generated. The psychological community had learned from studying him, had better understood the mechanisms of psychopathy, the ways predators integrate into communities. But mostly his death went unnoticed. The community that had once trusted him had long since moved on. He was remembered only as a cautionary tale, a reminder, a reason to be vigilant. His wife, Linda, had rebuilt her life under her maiden name. She'd moved to Oregon, remarried, become a grandmother. She volunteered at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help others recognize red flags she'd missed in her own marriage. She donated to the Amelia Taylor Foundation every year, anonymously. It was the least she could do, though she knew it would never be enough. 25 years later, 2049. A young journalist named Marcus Chen, no relation, published a book titled Perfect, The Amelia Taylor Story. It had taken him 3 years to research and write, conducting hundreds of interviews, reviewing thousands of pages of documents, visiting every location relevant to the case. But unlike most true crime books, this one focused on Amelia's life rather than her death. It detailed her childhood, her relationship with Eleanor, her time in the Peace Corps, her work at the library and community center. It included excerpts from her journal, with Eleanor's permission before she died, showing her thoughts, dreams, fears, and hopes. The book became a bestseller. Not because it was sensational, it wasn't, but because it was honest and human. It showed Amelia as a complete person. Kind but complicated, generous but sometimes lonely, strong but occasionally doubtful. Readers fell in love with her. They saw themselves in her struggles, her desire to matter, her fear that she wasn't doing enough. They were inspired by her choices, her commitment to service, her willingness to keep showing up even when it was hard. The book's final chapter profiled 10 Amelia Taylor scholars, now established in their careers, making their own impacts. A teacher who'd started a literacy program in underserved communities. A lawyer working on criminal justice reform. A doctor providing free care to uninsured patients. A social worker specializing in helping trauma survivors. She taught us that one person can make a difference, said Dr. James Morrison, the 2031 scholar who'd become the doctor. That ordinary goodness is actually extraordinary. That showing up with love and intention matters more than grand gestures. The book ended with a photo of the memorial bench in Union Point Park, still there after 25 years, still catching the sunrise, still offering a place for reflection and remembrance. Underneath, a quote from Amelia's journal, dated March 2001. I don't know if I'm changing the world. I don't know if what I do matters in the big cosmic sense. But I know it matters to Mrs. Delacroix when I read to her. I know it matters to Keisha when she finally passes that practice test. I know it matters to the kid at the library who discovers their first favorite book because I helped them find it. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. 30 years later, 2054. The New Bern Public Library underwent a major renovation and expansion. The new wing, funded partially by a massive grant from the Amelia Taylor Foundation, was dedicated entirely to community services. Meeting rooms for nonprofits, classrooms for adult education, a technology center for job training, and a resource center for volunteers. The entrance featured a life-size bronze statue of Amelia Taylor, sitting on a bench, book in her lap, looking up with a welcoming smile. Children climbed on her lap for photos. Adults paused to touch her bronze hand for good luck before job interviews or important meetings. The statue's base bore an inscription written by Eleanor before she died. Amelia Taylor, 1973 to 2001. Librarian, teacher, volunteer, friend. She believed in the power of kindness and the importance of showing up. She made everyone she met feel seen, valued, and possible. May we all aspire to love as broadly and serve as faithfully. The renovation was overseen by Patricia Oakes' successor, a woman named Danielle Hughes, Detective Hughes's daughter, inspired by her father's dedication to Amelia's case to pursue a career in library science. Danielle had never met Amelia but had grown up hearing stories about her, had been shaped by her legacy in ways she was only beginning to understand. This is what community looks like, Danielle said during the dedication ceremony. This is what happens when we honor the best in each other, when we build on foundations of generosity instead of fear. Amelia didn't get to see this, but in a way she created it. Every person who walks through these doors, every life changed in these rooms. That's her work continuing. 33 years later, 2057. A college student named Emma Taylor Morrison, Amelia's cousin's granddaughter, named in her honor, was writing her senior thesis at UNC Chapel Hill about the long-term community impact of violent crime. She'd chosen to study New Bern specifically, examining how the town had changed in the 3.5 decades since Amelia's murder. She'd interviewed dozens of residents, reviewed crime statistics, analyzed community programs, and studied the foundation's growth and impact. Her conclusion: tragedy could either destroy a community or galvanize it. New Bern had chosen the latter. Crime rates had actually decreased over the 33 years since Amelia's death, partly due to better policing, better training, and better community awareness. Volunteer participation had increased. Nonprofit funding had grown. Educational attainment had risen, particularly among first-generation college students who'd received foundation scholarships. Amelia Taylor's murder could have taught New Bern to be afraid, to distrust, to close itself off, Emma wrote in her thesis conclusion. Instead, the community chose to honor her by embodying what she believed: that kindness matters, that service transforms, that every person has value. They turned grief into action, rage into reform, despair into determination. That's resilience. That's love. That's legacy. Emma submitted her thesis and graduated summa cum laude. She was accepted to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, planning to pursue a career in nonprofit leadership and community development. At her graduation party, her grandmother, Amelia's cousin, gave her a gift. Amelia's original journal, the one Eleanor had kept for decades and passed to family before she died. "Your great-great-aunt Amelia believed in you before you were born," her grandmother said. "She believed in all of us, in our potential to be good and do good. Now it's your turn to carry that forward." Emma held the journal carefully, reverently. She could see Amelia's handwriting through the worn leather cover, could feel the weight of words written decades before she was born, but still somehow meant for her. She opened to a random page and read, "Today I helped a student who'd failed his GED test 3 times. He was ready to give up. I told him that failure isn't final, that every setback is just information for the next attempt. We made a new study plan. He thanked me, but really I should thank him. He reminded me why I do this, because giving up is easy and showing up is hard, and we all need someone who believes we're worth the hard things." Emma closed the journal and smiled. She understood now, more fully than ever, what it meant to carry someone's legacy. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never failing or doubting. It was about showing up anyway, about choosing kindness even when it's hard, about believing in people's potential even when they can't see it themselves. That was what Amelia had done. That was what Emma would do. The legacy continued. 50 years later, 2074. On the 50th anniversary of Amelia Taylor's murder, New Bern held a memorial service attended by over 2,000 people. Most of them had never known Amelia personally. She'd been dead longer than she'd been alive, but they knew her story. They'd grown up learning about her in schools, reading about her in history classes, hearing about her from parents and grandparents. The Amelia Taylor Foundation had grown into a regional powerhouse, one of the largest nonprofit funders in the Southeast. They'd awarded over 1,500 scholarships, funded thousands of programs, touched hundreds of thousands of lives. There were now Amelia Taylor schools, Amelia Taylor community centers, Amelia Taylor volunteer programs in 7 states. Her name had become synonymous with service, compassion, and resilience. The memorial service featured speakers who'd known her. There were only a handful left now, all elderly, all treasuring their memories like precious jewels. Jessica had died 5 years earlier, at 97. Her mind sharp until the end, still telling stories about her best friend who'd believed in impossible goodness. Patricia from the library had passed at 93. Keisha had died at 78, having spent 50 years as an educator, having taught thousands of students to believe in themselves the way Amelia had believed in her. The torch had been passed to new generations, to the scholars who'd become leaders, to the students who'd learned about Amelia in school and been inspired, to the children who'd sat on the bronze statue's lap and absorbed, almost through osmosis, the idea that one person's kindness could echo across decades. The service ended with a moment of silence, 2,000 people standing together in Union Point Park, watching the sun set over the Neuse River, remembering a woman who'd lived only 28 years, but whose impact had no expiration date. Then someone started singing Amazing Grace. It had been Amelia's favorite hymn, the one Eleanor had played at her funeral service back in 2002. Others joined in, voices blending, rising into the evening air. A song about being lost and found, about grace that saves. And in that moment, in that singing, in that gathering of people who'd been touched directly or indirectly by one woman's commitment to goodness, Amelia was present. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a living force, a principle embodied, an ideal made real. She'd wanted to matter. She'd wondered if her small acts of kindness meant anything in the grand scheme. 50 years later, looking at 2,000 people gathered in her honor, at 1,500 lives changed by scholarships bearing her name, at communities transformed by programs inspired by her example, the answer was clear. She'd mattered. She still mattered. She would always matter. Because love doesn't end when life does. Because goodness compounds across time. Because one person, truly committed to making the world better, can create ripples that become waves, that become tides, that reshape entire coastlines. That was Amelia Taylor's legacy. That was Eleanor's gift to the world, refusing to let grief be the end of the story, insisting that love could be stronger than death, that purpose could be born from pain. That was New Bern's choice, to honor their daughter by becoming more like her, by building the kind of community she'd believed in, by proving that monsters can't destroy what they don't understand. Marcus Chen had been wrong about everything except one thing. Amelia had been perfect. Not flawless, but complete. Not without struggle, but without pretense. Not invincible, but undeniably real. And real goodness, it turns out, is indestructible. Can be murdered, but it can't be killed. It lives on in the people it touched, the lives it changed, the world it improved. It lives on in bronze statues and memorial benches, in scholarship checks and library programs, in young people who choose service over selfishness, in communities that choose trust tempered with wisdom over fear. It lives on in stories told and retold, in journals read by great-great-nieces, in theses written by students who understand that one person's choice to show up with love can alter the trajectory of an entire town. Amelia Taylor died on October 17, 2001. But Amelia Taylor is still alive. She's alive in every act of kindness performed in her name. She's alive in every volunteer who shows up when it would be easier to stay home. She's alive in every student who gets a second chance, every person who learns to read, every family that finds hope in darkness. She's alive because Eleanor refused to let her die. She's alive because a community chose memory over forgetting. She's alive because love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe. And no monster can extinguish that. Not ever. Subscribe to Unsolved Justice, where silence is never forgotten.